Some sad news breaking in the last few minutes at the time of recording, and that is that former WWE superstar, the Genius Lanny Poffo, has passed away. The 68-year-old's passing was revealed on Thursday in a Facebook post by WWE Hall of Famer Hacksaw Jim Duggan. A cause of death has not been reported at the time of recording this video. Duggan posted to Facebook, quote, "With a very, very heavy heart, I've been asked to let everyone know about the passing of our friend and colleague Lanny Poffo, the Genius." He followed this up with another post saying, "R.I.P. Lanny." Poffo's father, wrestler/promoter Angelo Poffo, passed away at 84 years of age in 2010. His brother, the Macho Man Randy Savage, a WWE Hall of Famer, passed away in 2011 at the age of just 58. Poffo made his pro wrestling debut in 1974 for the short-lived All-South Wrestling Alliance before heading to the NWA's big-time wrestling territory along with his father. He spent the next decade working for promotions such as Portland Championship Wrestling, the Continental Wrestling Association, International Championship Wrestling, and had a short stint with Mid-South before joining WWE in 1985. As Leaping Lanny Poffo, he was known for reciting poetry and tossing frisbees into the crowd in his early WWE career. In 1989, he then adopted the villainous The Genius gimmick and even once defeated WWE champion Hulk Hogan by a countout on an episode of Saturday Night's Main Event. He also presided over his his coronation as the Macho King in September 1989. Now, with Randy Savage's move to WCW in the mid-90s, Poffo would also sign with WCW in 1995, and at one point there were actually plans for him to adopt the Gorgeous George gimmick that his brother Randy had purchased the rights to. He would tout Slam Sports that Gorgeous George was pivotal to the Poffo family's involvement in wrestling after George convinced Angelo not to quit the business in 1952. Angelo would later pay for George's funeral in 1964 when he passed away destitute at 48 years old. Despite preparing for the role, WCW never actually booked Poffo, but continued to pay him over the next 5 years, having a contract until 2000, despite the fact they never booked him. The Gorgeous George moniker ended up being given to Savage's girlfriend at the time, Stephanie Belair. Poffo inducted his late brother, the Macho Man, into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2015. He is a two-time holder of NWA's Detroit World Tag Team titles, once with his father and once with Chris Colt. He also held the NWA Gulf Coast Tag Team Championships once alongside his brother. Additionally, he is a former NWA Mid-America Heavyweight Champion and once held the NWA Mid-America Tag Team Championships along with Bobby Eaton. Poffo spent his final years retired and living in Ecuador. An authorized biography of himself was released in 2018. And again, it's a crying shame. It's incredibly a massive shame. And I think probably he is best known for his work with WWE for those 7 years between 1985 and 1992. He did at the time because he was known as a good worker. He was incredibly athletic. Yes, his brother was the more charismatic guy. Yes, his brother is the better-known Poffo, the Macho Man Randy Savage. But at the same time, Leaping Lanny Poffo, particularly the Genius, was a good worker. And he got heat with his poetry and his over-the-top character. And I say over-the-top because in reality, I don't think the Genius's personality was a million miles away from Lanny Poffo. Some of the most entertaining shoot interviews or just interviews in general are with Lanny Poffo. Like most people in his family, like his brother, he's got a distinct voice. He was incredibly articulate, and maybe that's where the Genius gimmick came from, because he does have this air of pontificating and having certain large words be used in sentences where you don't really necessarily think that they fit. Nevertheless, he will be incredibly missed, certainly. I mentioned he was prolific during his time of his career. He wrestled late into his life. Yes, he retired and spent his last days, as was previously reported, in Ecuador, but he was wrestling until at least, I believe, his 50s. Now, after leaving WWF, as I mentioned, he joined WCW. According to Cage Match, he wrestled his final match in January of 2020, as I mentioned, just 3 years ago. So he wrestled until the ripe age of 65 years old for Survival Championship Wrestling in Rensselaer, New York. He also, as I mentioned, inducted his brother, Macho Man Randy Savage, into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2015. He also appeared on an episode of AEW Dynamite back in 2020 as part of the tribute to the Legends of Memphis Wrestling. They were in Memphis at the time, and they brought out all of these Legends of Memphis Wrestling, of which Lanny Poffo is one of them, but certainly his father, Angelo Poffo, and Macho Man Randy Savage were big parts of the Memphis wrestling scene. Of course, they had that rivalry with their own promotion, an outlaw promotion, and Jerry Lawler's Memphis promotion that eventually that they came together, and because really the Poffos were shooting their own angle on that, But Poffo was also very active outside of wrestling as well. Outside of wrestling, he was the author of 2 published books, including the anti-smoking book, Limericks from the Heart and Lungs, his biographical comic, The Genius of Lanny Poffo, which was released in 2018, the same year that he started the Genius Cast with Lanny Poffo podcast, which saw him interview a host of wrestling legends. Now, per IMDb also, he was actually an actor and starred in movies such as Curse of the Wolf, Ninja Prophecy of Death, Alien Danger 2 with Raven Van Slender. As I mentioned, it's an incredibly sad bit of news whenever we lose anyone from the wrestling community. And again, Lanny Poffo, the majority of his career was certainly before my time, but I've sort of caught up with his life, his career, through the interviews that he's done over the year. And again, I would really recommend that with the likes of Kayfabe Commentaries. He did a fantastic, I believe it was a U-shoot with Sean Oliver, and he did a fantastic job with that. And as I mentioned, whilst he was a curious guy, a different guy, an eccentric guy, it didn't make him necessarily a bad guy. I mean, I remember him on the Dark Side of the Ring episode talking about his brother, Macho Man Randy Savage, and his marriage to Elizabeth. And he's sitting there on his bed looking up at the television that's sort of down from the screen, and he had all of these different affects of his life, these different things that were eccentric about himself. But that's what I found him so endearing about, is he didn't care what anyone thought about him. Lanny was just Lanny. He was just himself. And you go back and watch some of those promos from the Genius from the mid-1980s, and again, he faced off against lots of top stars during that time. And yeah, he wasn't a top star, and yes, he would job out most of the time. And you could argue that some of the jobs he got in his career were because of his relationship with his brother, but it's not as if he was a bad hand. Lanny Poffo wasn't a bad wrestler. And as a character, again, he was just that. He was a character. And sometimes, nowadays in pro wrestling, you're missing characters and you're missing gimmicks. And would the Genius work today? It almost kind of would. I mean, you see it right there. You see the Alpha Academy on Raw, right? You see Chad Gable being someone that's an Olympian, but also at the same time, he's a guy that's got a doctorate degree and he talks in big words. And we see these gimmicks come around over and over and over again. And Lanny Poffo was one of the more originators in that. And frankly, it would have been really interesting to see what he would have done with the Gorgeous George gimmick in WCW in the mid-1990s. Would that have worked during that era? I don't know if that would have worked during that era. I mean, that was the year that NWO was running rampant in World Championship Wrestling, and it was more reality-based. Eric Bischoff likes to say that a lot, doesn't he? It was reality-based. It was more reality television, sort of realistic storylines. And would Gorgeous George, or the Lanny Poffo-inspired version of him, would he have fitted in the 1990s, in the late 1990s, as WWE was in the Attitude Era and WCW was trying to be as realistic and sort of grungy as possible? Maybe it wouldn't have. Maybe that's why it didn't work. I don't know. Or maybe that's why it didn't get booked, rather. Nevertheless, he will certainly be missed. I will miss certainly hearing, as I said, his interviews about his brother, because realistically, he was the last link to the Poffo family. He was the last link to knowing what really did and didn't go on in certain situations. The Macho Man Randy Savage, there's so much mystery and intrigue surrounding him, and urban legends and myths. And in his later life, certainly, Lanny Poffo was able to address a lot of those, and he kind of became the keeper of his brother's legacy and was able to sort of fight some wrongs that maybe were being written or spoken about Macho Man that weren't necessarily true or he believes weren't fair, and offer that other side to the story that wasn't there anymore. And it's a shame that, as I say, that legacy of the Poffo family now isn't around, because it's a one that was so strong in pro wrestling, as I mentioned, through the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and into the 90s. And to see that sort of family close and come full circle is a shame, but that is life. That is the circle of life, unfortunately, and Lanny Poffo certainly will be missed. Again, when it comes to the nature of his death or anything like that, we don't know any details, and it's not fair to speculate or anything like that. What's important right now is to celebrate the life, the legacy, and the memories of Lanny Poffo and the entire Poffo family, certainly. So Lanny Poffo, a character, a pro wrestler, a gimmick, everything, all of the above, he will certainly be missed. So rest in peace, the genius Lanny Poffo. You will indeed be missed.